Okay, so happy full moon in Gemini. I'm excited to dive into this chart. It's a very interesting chart. There's a lot going on in the chart. And so, yeah, let's just dive right in. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so we have the chart for the full moon here. And when I was going over this chart initially, writing up my report, I was like, wow, this is such an interesting chart. I don't even know really where to begin. There's a lot of kind of like mixed energies happening in the chart. So we're going to dive into all the different aspects of what's going on in this chart. But the first thing that I want to say as just like kind of the overarching energy of this full moon so that we can all kind of tap into how it's been showing up for us individually is that the overarching energy of this full moon is like in general, a full moon tends to illuminate, right? It's one of our luminaries. The moon and the sun are our luminaries. They illuminate, they bring light, they bring clarity, they bring illumination. And oftentimes, because the full moon is kind of like the peak of our lunar cycle, so we start with a new moon, we move into the full moon 2 weeks later, which is like the peak of the energies, and then the energies start waning or moving back downward and inward. Typically with this peak energy, we do have an aha moment, a moment of clarity, a moment of illumination, right? In that kind of month-long cycle. However, I want to say that with this particular chart, that's not really necessarily the case. There is kind of like a lot of things happening in this chart that lead to a lack of clarity, that lead to a lack of kind of information, or things could feel perhaps very confusing, very unclear. So I'm going to talk about all the different reasons why. We are recording this just about a day after the full moon, so things have shifted, and I am going to talk about where we're at now as well. But in terms of the energy of this specific lunation, it's not a super typical full moon with like clarity of what's to be released or clarity of what's coming through. It's not really like a manifestation vibe. It's not really like this aha moment that we might expect with a full moon. And so we're going to talk about all the different reasons why that's the case and how we can actually work with this energy in a way that is empowering. Because there's always, however kind of challenging or difficult the chart may be, there's always going to be an empowering way to work with the chart so that we can have a kind of positive experience, or we can grow through the astrology of the moment. So we're going to talk about how we can do that. So first things first, I want to talk about the moon itself. So the moon is always going to be in exact opposition to the sun in a full moon chart. And in this case, we have the moon in the sign of Gemini. Now, with all of the archetypes and all of the signs, we have always the higher expression of those archetypes. And then we also have the shadow expression of those archetypes. In this particular full moon chart, we are feeling more of the shadow aspects of Gemini. And I'll dive into why that's the case. But first things first, we're just noticing, we want to notice what aspects the moon is making. And the only real aspect that the moon is making in this chart is a square to Neptune. So it's a challenging aspect. And it's challenging in a very specific way, which I'll dive into. But for many reasons within this chart, we may be feeling more of those shadow elements of Gemini. So what are those? So the archetype of Gemini is really the sign of duality. It's the twins in the zodiac kind of archetypes. And the duality of Gemini can be a beautiful gift. It can be this possibility to see things from all sides, to hold polarity, to hold duality, to hold difference of opinion, to be able to see things from multiple perspectives, that kind of devil's advocate. Also the capacity to hold many truths, to hold many balls in the air. I like to think of this kind of jester archetype with Gemini, holding many projects, balls, passions, inspiration in the air in this kind of seamless and playful way. This would be the higher expression of Gemini. However, the shadow expression of Gemini, we also see through the archetype of the twins. The twins can be, a couple of different expressions that I like to think of with the shadow of Gemini is the expression of talking out of both sides of your mouth, right? We see this kind of visual image of like, like, what's it called when it's like a one body but two heads, kind of twins, like this kind of image, right? Where one is saying one thing, the other is saying the opposite. This can be kind of some of the shadow of Gemini, talking out of both sides of our mouth, right? Saying one thing to one person and then saying another thing to another person. It's like, okay, they're holding that duality, but it may feel out of integrity, or it may feel that there's like, some lack of intentionality or truthfulness with that kind of turn of phrase, speaking out of both sides of our mouth. We can think of that with the shadow of Gemini. We can also just think of this as like a lack of clarity, and kind of like it's like we're trying to juggle all of these balls, but we're dropping balls, and like we're scattered a bit, and we're not really focused on any one thing. And so because we're not focused on any one thing, everything is kind of losing impact or losing momentum. Like we're not doing the best of anything because we're not giving anything our full attention, our full focus. So this can be also one of the shadow sides of Gemini. Now, the reason why we are feeling the more shadowy aspects of Gemini, this more scattered energy, this more unclear, things are not as they seem, right? We're talking out of both sides of our mouth. Like, are we meaning what we say? Do we have internal clarity to be able to communicate and express that, right? Is because when we're looking at the full moon chart, we always want to look at the full moon ruler. And so the ruler of Gemini is Mercury. And Mercury in this chart is in retrograde. Now, since the full moon happened, Mercury has stationed direct, but at the time where the full moon was actually exact, Mercury was still in retrograde motion and was actually in its moment of station. What that means is that before Mercury changes direction, either goes direct or goes back into retrograde, it has this moment of coming to kind of like a standstill, right? We call this stationary. So it's not moving forward or backward, it's just stationary. And in the moment of this chart, Mercury was stationary, but stationary in retrograde still. So Mercury kind of like doesn't know what the fuck's going on in this moment. Mercury's about to slingshot forward, but that clarity hasn't yet happened. And Mercury's at this standstill. We're catching up and integrating with all the lessons of the Mercury retrograde from the past 3 weeks. But that moment of illumination hasn't landed yet with this full moon. We're still in the like, what is it? Nothing quite makes sense, right? With Mercury, Mercury rules our mind, our intellect, our communication, mental processes. And so whenever we have Mercury retrograde, we're reimagining, we're revisiting, we're revisioning, we're revising some area of our life. We're looking back and we're reassessing some kind of area of our life that Mercury's having us reassess. And when Mercury stations direct, we generally have the capacity to move forward, take action on that mental clarity that Mercury has brought with the movement forward. However, in this chart, Mercury is still in retrograde and is in station, is in a standstill. So Mercury still doesn't know what the fuck's going on. Mercury is still confused. Mercury is still like sifting through kind of all of this confusing, unclear data from the past 3 weeks, like information, conversations, like whatever it was that was your like Mercury retrograde homework, whatever area of your life you were kind of revisiting, revising, reestablishing a new understanding of through this Mercury retrograde, those questions were going to be coming up really strongly around this full moon. And the answers to those questions have not yet landed during this full moon. So the full moon is like amplifying the questioning without having the mental clarity to have the answers yet. This is going to be even further amplified by the fact that Mercury retrograde in this chart is in an opposition to Jupiter. It's not an exact opposition, but it's still there. And Jupiter is also in retrograde, and Jupiter in this chart is the ruler of the sun. So with the full moon, we always have the sun and moon in exact opposition. And so the sun's ruler is Jupiter and the moon's ruler is Mercury. And both of them are in each other's sign. Like Mercury's ruler is Gemini and Jupiter is in Gemini. And Jupiter's ruler is Sagittarius and Mercury is in Sagittarius. What happens, what we call this when this happens in astrology is mutual reception. There's two planets in opposition that are in each other's ruling signs, right? Or they're not even necessarily in opposition. They're in mutual reception. They're in each other's ruling signs. This can, when we have mutual reception, it can be kind of a helpful thing. But in this particular case, it's not really that helpful because Jupiter, as we know, is also in retrograde. Jupiter is going to amplify everything, especially in an opposition, right? An opposition is a little bit of a challenging aspect. Jupiter in this case can be blowing things out of proportion. And so those confusing thoughts, those lack of clarity, those like back and forths that we're having within our own psyche, that little like, is it this or is it that? Or is it this way or is it that way? Like that whole journey that we've been on through Mercury retrograde was just amplified through this full moon. It's like Jupiter's blowing it out of proportion. Jupiter's like, it's a bigger deal than you think it is, and is really kind of making us go back and forth in this little like mental story that we're having with ourselves. And with it being all these mutable energies, Sagittarius and Gemini both being mutable signs, there's not a lot of clarity. It's just like, it's very changeable. It feels this way, then it feels the other way. It's like the shadow of all the mutable energies is really like this indecision kind of energy, right? So we don't know what's what. Nothing feels super clear. To add on top of all of that, we have the moon in square to Neptune. Only aspect this moon is making in the chart is a square to Neptune. And if we know about Neptune, then we know that Neptune can be a really beautiful planet in its kind of highest expression. It's bringing us transcendence. It's bringing us connection to the mystical realm, the ethereal realm, that place of unconditional love, pure source consciousness, right? Neptune is really all of those wonderful things. But in a square aspect, we're not getting the best of Neptune. We're definitely going to get more of the shadow and more of the challenging sides of Neptune. And the challenging sides of Neptune are illusion, fantasy, deception, delusion, like Alice in Wonderland energy, not in a good way. Cheshire Cat, like nothing is what it seems, right? And so we have this like extra layer of lack of clarity. Things are not as they seem. We're not perceiving things accurately. We're not having an objective, clear perspective on reality under this full moon. We're having a lot of mental chatter. We're having that mental chatter. There's no like resolution to the mental chatter. The Jupiter influence is just amplifying the mental chatter, making it feel really loud, making it feel really significant, making it feel larger than life, more important than it maybe really even is. And then, we have the square to Neptune. So a lot of kind of like chaos, honestly, in the chart. Just a lot of like, what the fuck is going on kind of energy in the chart. And then the other thing that I want to pull focus to is that, we are in these, if we take our attention to the North Node here in Aries at 2 degrees, the nodes move in backwards direction. So the North Node is moving out of Aries. We're wrapping up this 18-month nodal journey of North Node Aries, South Node Libra that we've been in since July of last year. And so we're in these final moments of this nodal journey. And while we're in these final moments of this nodal journey, we've got the ruler of the North Node, Mars, also in retrograde. So Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. This isn't as nearly as frequent as a Mercury retrograde. It's also a longer retrograde. It's about 2 months long. We're already in Mars retrograde, and we're going to be in Mars retrograde until February 23rd. And so the ruler of the North Node, which is the North Node, is always where we're going to look to in the chart in terms of where's our North Star? Where are we moving towards? Like, where's our compass? Where do we need to be pointing our compass toward? The ruler of the North Node's in retrograde. So we know our Aries North Node themes by now. Like, Mars has not been in retrograde this whole time. We know our North Node themes. We know our South Node themes, right? We understand that the South Node in Libra has been asking us to shed outdated patterns, specifically around relationships, specifically around codependency. I'm not going to stop hammering this in until the nodes shift. Like, the South Node in Libra is bringing so much illumination to the sneakiness of our patterns of codependency, self-abandonment, self-sacrifice, self-sabotage, where we sacrifice ourselves for the sake of harmony within relationships. That's been the healing work that we've been invited to do with South Node Libra. And with North Node Aries, it's been like, choose yourself, choose yourself, choose yourself, yet again, choose yourself. And we're still on that path. We're still very much being pushed towards this North Node in Aries of choose yourself. We've got like about a month left. I don't have the date exactly, but it's like about mid-January that the nodes are going to shift into Virgo Pisces. And that's going to be a very different nodal journey for the next 18 months. But we're still in this last kind of final stretch of North Node Aries. However, the ruler of the North Node, Mars, is still in retrograde. And so even though since this full moon happened, Mercury has stationed direct, that Mercury stationed direct normally is going to feel like a slingshot, right? We've been pulling back, getting clarity, figuring shit out, going back through the archives, revisiting, re-understanding, like comprehending something in a new way, bringing a new belief system into our life. And when Mercury stations direct, typically we have that like slingshot effect of like, okay, now I know with clarity and decisiveness what direction I need to move in, and I'm going to bring my action towards that. And the post shadow period is like integrating and taking action on what we learned during retrograde. This particular station direct is not going to feel quite so magnificent in that way, because Mars, the planet of action, the planet of drive, the planet of our individual personal willpower, right? Our solar plexus energy, the part of us that takes initiative and makes things happen in the 3D. This is Mars. Mars is still in retrograde. So we may have some clarity now that Mercury has stationed direct, but we are still not necessarily ready to take action on that clarity, right? Because we still have Mars in retrograde. And Mars being the ruler of the North Node and Venus being the ruler of the South Node are in opposition in this chart. So another tense aspect, another challenging aspect. We have the rulers of the nodes, Mars and Venus, in opposition in this chart. Venus is she's slowing down. She is going to go retrograde in March of this coming year. She's already slowing down in preparation for that retrograde. Mars is in retrograde. There's like a domestic dispute happening between the lovers in the chart right now. You know, relationships are definitely, I hate to keep harking on this, but like still relationships are a huge theme in the chart. They will continue to be until the nodes shift and potentially onwards, because we're going to go into a Venus retrograde, and that's going to pull focus again to relationships. So relationships are still a major theme here. And in this particular full moon chart, like there's some kind of a challenge for our relationships. There's the anima animus, like the inner masculine and feminine are in conflict in this chart. They're not getting along. There's a disagreement. There's an opposition happening between them. And there's shadow work, I want to say, coming to the surface around that, because Venus is coming quite close to being in conjunction with Pluto here too. So Venus and Pluto are hanging out there. They're being opposed by Mars. Mars is retrograde. Mars is feeling like Mars is our drive, our motivation, our forward movement. And Mars, when it's retrograde, can feel very stuck, stagnant, contained. Like that masculine energy of Mars wants to be moving forward, and it's not moving forward. And so that feeling can feel like being sort of caged. It can feel like we're not free. It can feel, right? Like that impulse for freedom can be really coming up here, and being challenged. And then it's being challenged by this Venus, which is definitely, we're seeing sort of shadows of relationship coming to the surface here because we've got Pluto so close to Venus. Those shadows in relationship are asking us to pause before we move forward. Like, there is a direction that we need to take in our romantic relationships. There is some sort of movement forward. And again, it comes down to choosing ourselves with the North Node in Aries, but there's something we need to address. Like, there's some kind of shadow work that's being asked to look at, that's sort of like, yeah, okay, you can't move forward right now, but you can't move forward because you actually need to look at this thing. You need to look at this thing so that you can really finally wrap up this North Node Aries, South Node Libra lesson. We're not going to have the nodes in these two signs for another 18 years, right? Is that correct? Oh, my math is hard with this, but yeah, I believe it's 18 years. So, like, it's going to be a while. And so we want to use this opportunity to grow, to heal through our romantic relationships, because this has been the journey that we've been on over the last 18 months. And this final kind of moments of it are like, okay, like, did you get the shadow work? Did you see how your pattern is maybe still playing out in a really sneaky way? Because, like, we've had moments in this nodal journey where it's been far more obvious. We've had moments where it's been far more like in your face, this is your pattern, right? But in this moment, it's more like there's a subtle, sneaky, sort of shadowy way in which whatever your shadow pattern is in romantic relationships is being revealed. And it's like, there's just still a little bit of, again, I want to bring it back to Mercury, the ruler of the chart. There's some mindset work for you to do around that. There's some kind of like clearing around your belief systems. There's a mental story, perhaps, that's like you're still at war with, or you're still struggling with. And we want to be moving towards that North Node in Aries. The last thing I want to speak to in this chart is like, okay, how do we work with all of this energy, right? I've spoken to a lot of the conflicts. I've spoken to a lot of the challenges, a lot of the lack of clarity, like what the fuck's going on kind of energy. How do we work with this chart? So the way we want to work with the chart is we want to look to the North Node. And when we find the North Node, okay, we've got the North Node last couple degrees of Aries, ruled by Mars, which is in retrograde. So it's not so much about doing. It's not so much about what you're doing right now. It's about who you're being. Because with Mars in retrograde, we're not doing so much. We're not trying to like hustle, hustle, hustle. We're not trying to get shit done. We're not racing into the end of the year. And we're not racing into the start of the year, quite frankly. Like, this whole Gregorian calendar paradigm that encourages us to have all these goals and these intentions. I always make this joke. Like, the reason why we set New Year's resolutions is because it's Capricorn season, not because it's the New Year's. Like, Capricorn energy wants to set long-term objectives. This is why we feel the desire to set long-term goals during the new year. And then Aquarius is a free thinker. And this is why by February, we're like, fuck it. We don't care about our resolutions anymore. Like, this is what happens every year, right? But this feeling that we think we're expected to have in Western society of, we're expected to start the new year with this big bang and everything's going to like come into place and we're going to know where we're going. Like, that's very rarely the case astrologically. And another just reminder, if you're new here, the astrological new year begins in the spring equinox, which happens in March, right? So this is when we're actually beginning the new year. The energy is moving up and outward. The winter season is very much a yin energy. It's very much meant for us to go inward, to reflect, again, to refine our long-term vision in Capricorn season, to expand our perspective in Aquarius season, and then to let everything dissolve into trust in Pisces season. And as we complete that cycle, we then move into Aries season, which is like our fire, our cardinal fire that wants to chase and achieve and go after sort of our vision for the year. So we're going to see a very slow winter. We're moving into that energy now, and we're already in it in quite a lot of ways. We're in a very yin inward energy always with winter in the northern hemisphere, but astrologically as well, with Mars being in retrograde until February 23rd, and then we're going to have Venus go into retrograde in March. Like we're in this sort of pause. It's not going to feel full speed ahead in the new year. And so don't put that expectation on yourself, you know, if that's something that weighs heavily on you from sort of societal expectations. So okay, I got kind of a little bit off track of what I wanted to say with that, but I just want to really hammer that in about the cycles and the seasons, and like the new year being a very sort of yin, reflective, inward. We're looking back, we're gathering our energy, we're in rest moment, we're in integration moment, we're not in pushing forward moment. Definitely not until at least Mars goes direct. So with that being said, with Mars being the ruler of the North Node, our embodiment of the North Node in Aries, which is all about choosing ourselves, all about knowing what is best for us as an individual and really honoring that with our action. Right now, it's not so much about our action, it's much more about our beingness, because Mars is in retrograde. We're not necessarily taking these like strong and drastic actions. It's more, who are you being? What is your embodiment? How are you living in your day-to-day life as the embodiment of that North Node in Aries? And the other really significant thing that I want to speak to in this chart, which is again going to really inform the first couple of months of the year, is that the North Node is coming into a conjunction with Neptune here. And this is going to continue to get tighter. We're going to really be sitting in this conjunction over the months of January, February. And this is a beautiful transit. This is going to move into Pisces. North Node's going to move into Pisces, and we're going to really have that North Node in Pisces conjunct Neptune. Neptune is the ruler of Pisces. This is a powerful moment. And Neptune being this kind of energy that can help us connect to the power of the divine, like something larger than ourselves, our spiritual connection, that connection to the mystical, the ethereal, the less than concrete. Like Neptune is definitely not about the material realm. And with the North Node in conjunction to Neptune, especially with the North Node in its last few degrees of Aries in conjunction with Neptune, it's like, by now, you know who it is that you're being asked to be. You know what version of you need to embody to really choose yourself. And in this moment, it's not about this pushing, forceful, kind of dominant Aries energy. It's actually a lot more about surrendering and trusting and being the embodiment of your highest self without knowing where it's all gonna go. Because right now, with all of this chaos we've got going on in the chart, our mind, we've got Mercury in retrograde, our mind doesn't know where it's all going. We do not have the clarity right now. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what like how it's going to unfold. We don't know where the story is taking us. And we're not actually meant to know right now. Right now, what we're meant to do is we're meant to know who we came here to be, how we can embody that version of ourselves really, really strongly and stay anchored and rooted in that, because the North Node is kind of the North Star of the chart at all times. So how can we be really embodied and rooted in like the beingness of who you are at your essence, and trust the divine, trust Neptune, trust this kind of like cosmic play of forces to let it all play out perfectly. Like you don't need to know, you need to know what it is that you want and who it is that you want to be, how it comes to you, when it comes to you, through who it comes to you, what exactly comes to you, like what the details look like, none of that is your business. And your job right now is to really surrender the knowing of the details and surrender the how it's all going to happen, and just hold the vision of, this is who I need to be. This is who I came here to be. This is my highest self embodiment. And when I am rooted in that, and I'm rooted in my trust in a higher power, when I'm rooted in my trust in the divine, it's always all unfolding perfectly. We can't mess it up, right? We really can't mess it up. The only way that we can mess it up is by trying to control under this chart. Like, the more your mind tries to control, or the more that you're falling back again into that shadow of Libra, like if you're falling back into self-abandonment, if you're falling back into abandoning your needs, abandoning your desires, past life, like with Venus being here with Pluto, it's like past life or very deep, very ancient, kind of very maybe generational patterns in relating. Like, if you're not, that's the only way that you can really fuck this up, is if you're like repeating an old wounded pattern that's ancient, that's ancestral or past life, that's connected to that kind of south node in Libra of self-sacrifice, self-abandonment, codependency. That's the self-sabotage. Your mind is going to feel really confused right now about which way it is that you need to go. But there's this like part of you, this higher self part of you, this soul level part of you that knows the embodiment of who you need to be in this moment, and can trust the divine unfoldment of how it's all going to happen. Because right now with Mars in retrograde, it's really not about you steering the ship. Like, it's really not about your personal individual free will steering the ship. That's Mars energy, and Mars is in retrograde. So Mars is like we're not steering the ship right now, right? And the North Node is with Neptune. It's like, okay, there's this really beautiful potential for kind of like our dreams, our visions, our manifestations, our fantasy almost to like come into form with the North Node and Neptune. But we need to be willing to surrender. We need to be really willing to let go of control and let go of our mind's limited capacity to see how it could be, because our human mind, these personal planets, Mercury, Mars, Venus, these are personal planets. This is like our ego self, right? This is our human self. These parts of us, they think that they know where we're going and what's best for us, but ultimately it's the outer planets, it's Pluto, it's Neptune, and it's Uranus that are steering the ship, and they show us that through these kind of ways that they influence our lives in these unpredictable and unexpected ways that are transcendent of the personal planet's desires and free will. And so right now, especially, like, it's not about choosing your way. It's not about you deciding and you making it so, and you holding this like this feeling of like you have power over God or power over the divine. It's really not about that. It's about you knowing who it is that you're here to be as your highest self, and you being able to surrender the vision, the detail, the unfoldment of that to something higher than you, to this divine power, and allowing what needs to come up to clear to be cleared, and not needing to understand it with your mind, not needing to understand it from an ego perspective, because you're not going to right now. That's the thing with this chart. It's like you're not going to understand it. The more you fight it and try to understand it, the more suffering you're going to experience. So let it go, surrender it, give it up to God. That is my kind of highest recommendation for this particular full moon chart. And I do want to skip just to the chart of the moment here really quick. So as we can see in this chart of the moment, the moon has moved into Cancer, And so we're out of the full moon energy. The moon's out of Gemini and moved into Cancer. Mercury has stationed direct. So sometime last night, there might have been like some kind of a clicking. There might have been some kind of mental clarity, or like a piece may have clicked into place where it's like, okay, this thing that I've been back and forthing on, is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that, is like feels more clear now. But again, what action do we need to take on that clarity? Still not sure. Like, we don't exactly know what we need to do about it. We might have a greater knowing. And it doesn't feel like that typical sort of slingshot forward moment that we often feel when the Mercury retrograde comes to a close. So, but the chart has already shifted in a lot of more helpful ways here. Like we're now seeing like this kind of trine with Mercury, making a trine to the nodes, making a trine to Mars, right? That's helpful. We can see that Venus is moving into a trine with Jupiter. So like, okay, Venus is having sort of a bit of a more helpful conversation now with Jupiter. There's this feeling of possibility. There's a feeling of expansion that we're moving into this week. Whereas last few days, it's been maybe feeling just really like that, what the fuck kind of energy. We're moving into a bit more, oh, there's possibility, there's expansion, but we don't necessarily know where it's all going. And our greatest kind of bet now is to work with the North Node and Neptune here. Know who it is that you came here to be, and surrender the how, the way that it unfolds to a higher power, to your connection with source, to your connection with spirit, to the divine, to God. Because that is really what's going to be the greatest impact that you can have right now. So I hope that you enjoyed this full moon report, and I will see you at our next circle. Or yeah, I'll see you soon.